Education was a court case that was debated in and outside the court. It altered our history and set segregation disputes into motion. It affected the U.S. socially and politically by making equal opportunity and education the law of the land. The people in the Brown v. Board case fought to gain more equality and have changed our country forever. But it was also not an immediate solution to this controversy. Welcome to this WMBC Nightly News. I'm Maeve Connors, tonight's host, with Claire, Mikey, and Bridget. Brown v. Board of Education was a court case in a nationwide debate that dealt with the issue of schools segregating and discriminating against students based on their race, which violates the 14th Amendment. The result declared racial segregation in schools to be unconstitutional. One of the main issues took place in Topeka, Kansas, and the case was held in the Supreme Court. It was officially decided during the Civil Rights Movement. The case was first filed in 1951 and was officially decided on May 17, 1954. Two important people involved were Linda Brown and her father, Oliver Brown. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP, was very important in the case, Thurgood Marshall and Jack Greenberg being important lawyers representing Browns. This information shows the important people, places, and dates of this historic, social, and political altering movement.
Segregation is the act of splitting people up based on their race, religion, or identity by law. One type of segregation was black codes, which were discriminatory laws passed during the time of Andrew Johnson to make white people feel powerful. Jim Crow laws were laws and practices that increased racial segregation, restricted integration, and made black codes legal.
During this time, many areas of the country were segregated, meaning that white people and African Americans had to be in different schools, neighborhoods, etc. The Freedmen's Rule made it so law enforcement could change many things in the Civil Rights Act. African Americans who resisted faced many problems or punishments and made the codes difficult to enforce. Whites usually found a legal way of violence against African Americans after they won freedom.
Segregation is important to note because it was one of the main reasons there is a need to fight for equality. This shows debate and diplomacy because these Jim Crow laws and segregation were debated everywhere. Many people knowing they were not equal, while some thought separate and equal was acceptable. Also, segregation after this case and many others has come to diplomacy that it is not equal. Now on to Mikey, tuning in from Topeka, Kansas.
Thank you, Claire. Well, it is important to note some relevant cases that occurred before Brown v. Board of Education. There have been plenty of cases that are important when looking at what may have made this case so successful, such as Gonglum v. Rice, Dred Scott, and many more.
I'm sorry, Mikey. Could you elaborate? I don't know a lot about those cases.
Yes, the viewers will have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, right, of course. How about this? I can quickly take you through these cases so that the viewers can better understand the cases and their impacts.
Sounds great, Mikey. Go right ahead.
I'll start with Dred Scott, a case surrounding a slave named Dred Scott, who argued that since his master hadn't lived in the North for multiple years, he should be free. The Supreme Court denied Scott's wish, coming to the decision that African Americans could not be citizens of the United States.
What happened in that Rice one, though?
Well, Gonglum v. Rice was actually a similar case to Brown v. Board of Education, but occurred in 1927. In this case, the Supreme Court decided that a young Chinese American girl would have to attend a segregated black school rather than a white one. Without so many troubles surrounding segregation in schools, would Brown v. Board of Education still have been so successful?
Great question, Mikey.
Yeah, these cases paved the way for Brown v. Board of Education, so it is important to recognize them.
Definitely. Thank you for your wonderful discussion, Mikey. These previous cases helped the Brown v. Board case to succeed. These were large debates that caused debates in the future and helped new diplomacies to occur in society and politics. Now, we will move on to Bridget in Washington, D.C., who will be discussing the court case.
Hi. The Brown v. Board unanimous court case decision to end school segregation was made on May 17, 1954. The Brown family was fighting against the Topeka, Kansas Board of Education. The court focused on the evidence that segregations of schools compromised the quality of schools and the mental impacts of segregation. The Supreme Court justices present during the Brown v. Board of Education were all white men. This shows excellent progress in public opinion on race and discrimination. The second Brown decision was announced on May 31, 1955, and many Southerners were very upset about this. This decision told states to begin the desegregation process with all deliberate speed, meaning that schools should integrate as soon as possible. This is important to note because it is a primary source and is showing the actual law or ruling that was made in court which started to end the debate of segregation by race. This court case also gave diplomacy to our government and society around the country. This information also shows what happened during the actual Brown v. Board of Education case. Now on to important people involved in the case.
One very important person involved in this case was, of course, Thurgood Marshall, who was an important member of the NAACP and was the head lawyer for Brown. He became the Supreme Court's first African American judge. Another important group in the Brown versus Board case was the Nhd Cc, an organization that defends the rights of African Americans and fought for racial justice without violence. This group helped Brown win the case. Linda Brown, the daughter of Oliver Brown, was an especially important person involved in the case. She was denied her right to attend an all-white school that was in proximity to her home because schools in the U.S. were segregated. She had to walk a mile to get to the bus that would get her to school. She said, "I just couldn't understand. We lived in a mixed neighborhood, but when school time came, I would have to take the school bus and go clear across town, and the white children I played with would go to this other school." Oliver Brown sued and was the lead plaintiff in the case. Other families in Topeka were involved in the case as well because they were discriminated against. Chief Justice Earl Warren made the decision in the court case. All these people helped in the debate about discrimination in schools. They helped lead to diplomacy before and after the Brown versus Board case in communities and our government. Now back to Bridget, who will tell us about journalism from this time.
One of the New York Times newspapers had a headline saying that the High Court bans school segregation, 9-0 decision grants time to comply. This article was talking about how banning the school segregation would be a big turning point in our history, and how it will be ending segregation and turning over a new leaf for schools and African Americans. Politicians from the South were outraged when the Supreme Court banned racial segregation in public schools. One governor from Georgia even went as far to say, "There never will be mixed schools as long as I'm governor." The United States Supreme Court, by its decision today, has reduced our Constitution to a mere scrap of paper. Thurgood Marshall argued that segregation makes learning harder for students. Thurgood said, "The badge of slavery is perpetuated by the state segregation institutes." In one newspaper, someone thought that the Supreme Court has no authority to end segregation and states should be left free to handle this issue in their own way through their own legislators. Georgia Attorney General Eugene Cook commented bitterly, "This decision has provoked a social, economic, political, and legal revolution in at least 23 states." Soon after, riots and other violence occurred in some places when black children started to go to white schools, which then eventually caused segregation to come back. And even after the court case in 1954, 17 states still had segregated schools.
Thanks, Bridget. All this journalism shows opinions in the social and political debate of our Brown versus Board. Now, back to my Keith, who will discuss how this important case has impacted our nation today.
Thank you, Maeve. When talking about Brown versus Board of Education, it is important to talk about the impact it had then, but also the impact it still has today. Progress in racial injustice has been occurring greatly in the past 60 years, a majority of the reason being Brown versus Board of Education and its fellow debates.
When was this progress happening?
Well, the impacts of Brown versus Board of Education scattered the decades since it happened, but more progress happened in some years than others. Take the 60s, for example. Although Brown versus Board of Education happened mere years before this decade, the 60s were not a great time of progress. This decade had a variety of issues, including the lack of truly integrated public schools in the South.
Yikes, did anything good happen in the 60s?
The civil rights movement, although it started growing in the 50s, made great progress in the 60s as well. This movement fought racial discrimination in suffrage, segregation, and other categories. The 70s also had small leaps of headway, the government beginning to bus children from different areas to have more diversity in schools.
But how is this important today?
Well, the Black Lives Matter movement has a strong presence on today's politics and many people's lives. And although these might only seem like small moments of progress, they will eventually build up for a happy, safe, and equal society. Although the Brown versus Board case was significant, equality debates are still going on in our world today.
As you can see, the Brown versus Board of Education case was a complex, important part of our history with many different aspects.
Although Brown versus Board was not an immediate solution to the controversy that is segregation, it gained more equality for people in our society and changed our country forever.
It was an incredible court case that was debated in and outside the courtroom.
It affected our country in so many ways, including making equal opportunity in education the law of the land, and set segregation disputes into motion.
These examples show the effects that Brown versus Board of Education had on equality in society and how it relates to our government.
Thank you for watching this double NBC broadcast.